All right, Rick, so you and I both have journalism degrees. We won't argue of who went to the better school now, but what is the state of journalism? Where are we at today?
Well, but let me just say, Minnesota, Minnesota.
Purdue.
Go
It's
Gophers.
cool.
Okay, both Big Ten schools, by the
Go
way.
Boilers.
You know, this is really the right time and the right question of why some of the things that we're doing may be right or may be wrong.
And I will tell you, Rick, as a friend and a colleague, I've never asked you what side of the political spectrum you're on, but the beauty that I love, and it's that true form of journalism, every single night I can't tell. There's nights where I'm like, oh, he's probably a Republican. And then there's nights where I'm like, oh, he's definitely a total liberal. But then there's times where I'm like, I just don't know. And you know what?
But that's how we're supposed to be.
That is how it's supposed to be. Just hours after the U.S. airstrike killed a top Iranian military commander, the U.S. Department of Defense has given the green light to deploy thousands of additional troops to the Middle East as tensions with Iran mount. Now, the troops will come from the Immediate Response Force of the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So for more on this troop deployment and how Iran could retaliate, we turn now to former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. A lot happening today. First things first, your reaction to the U.S.'s immediate response of sending troops there. Elsewhere around the world, several countries have condemned the Turkish parliament's decision to send troops to Libya. Israel, Greece, and Cyprus are calling Turkey's plans reckless. Take a listen. Well, in a phone call with the Turkish leader, the U.S. president also raised concerns that foreign interference could further complicate the situation in Libya, though the two did agree to maintain their diplomatic cooperation. Calling out all wannabe spies. At least in Canada, that country's Department of National Defense is recruiting role players to help train special forces with intelligence work. RT's Alex Mihailovich is in Toronto, where he is following the story. And Alex, this seems kind of like an unusual initiative by a government. If, you know, James Bond enthusiasts out there, it sounds like a pretty good call out for a job, huh?
Well, absolutely. Look, they want to find actors.
Over now to Steve Christakos for today's World of Sports. Steve, let's end the week on a really positive note here. You have an inspirational one for us all, huh?
Yes, this is sure to warm everybody's hearts right now.
Well, it is a bombshell report that's hardly getting any traction, but it should be. An antivirus program used by hundreds of millions of people around the world is selling highly sensitive web browsing data to many of the world's biggest companies. Every search, every click, every buy, on every site. Are we in an age now, do you think, Ben, where no matter what, we just have to assume that our data is going to be sold to somebody, or our data's out there and people will be able to see it?
Yeah, to some extent I think we do, because this is what internet businesses are.
But playing devil's advocate here, isn't that the purpose of businesses? They want to, help their customers and bring, what the customers want to them.
Yeah.
Isn't this kind of helping that?
So the positive of it would be, yes.
All right, so it may be only the beginning of 2020, but discoveries are already turning ancient myth into reality. Archaeologists have discovered that a tomb in the western Russian town of Devista contained the remains of 4 women. To talk about this amazing and exciting new discovery, here we are joined by RT producer, PhD, and expert in the ancient and medieval worlds, Dr. Joe Ricci. Okay, Joe, this is pretty interesting. So fill us in. Who were these ladies and where on earth did they come from?
Yeah, sure.
Defendants in the case involving the Venezuelan embassy that was a proxy battleground in U.S. coup efforts against the South American country were back in court. Now, today's hearing in front of a federal judge was key because the prosecution has attempted to keep certain pieces of evidence away from the jury.
But Donald, you're a sick person. You're really a cruel, sick, disgusting person.
And there you have it. Joining me now to discuss this, who is not cruel, sick, and disgusting, the host of Politicking, Larry King. Hey, Larry, good to see you again, my birthday buddy. All right, so Larry, there's this term going around with the young ones like us, this term called going Karen, or can I speak to the manager? Now, it's been blowing up all over Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, all about people being tattletales. Now, you're a parent, I'm a child, so I'm sure you've seen your kids tattletale on each other, and sometimes it's a good thing. You find some stuff out, right? Is what Mika is doing, though, is this really tattling, or is this actually just her being a proactive journalist?
No, she's being a proactive wife.
And I could understand as well, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I like to keep things fair and balanced. So you have Joe and Mika every morning criticizing the president on MSNBC. We know this. Donald Trump, we know he is hands down, base level, he is an entertainer. He knows how to get those ratings and how to fire up his base. Is this one of these things where it's like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of tired of you guys taking punches at me. Now, for me, gloves are off. I'm taking a punch at you. What say you?
Take a punch at them politically, but criminally, to kind of hint that you ought to open an investigation into a death of a couple of years ago, that's dirty pool. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did, because they're really ticked. And I don't know, what I question here is, why does the president get into these kind of silly things? He doesn't like Scarborough criticizing him, so he brings up a death of years ago that might have been Scarborough involved. That's why. I can't figure that out. I know Donald Trump 40 years, I still can't figure him out. I know the Scarboroughs, I know how hurt they are. They have a right to be hurt. They're being, if not directly accused, they're being semi-accused of a crime. Why do they level? I don't understand it, but I understand her anger.
So, Larry, you now have actually, kind of piggybacking off of this, you have Hollywood stars coming out, too, almost making fun of this whole Karen movement, calling Mika Brzezinski like the father of all Karens. You have a guy like Kevin James, who has this movie, Out of Touch. It's a short film where it shows him running away with a friend from the cops after someone tattletales on them for not wearing a mask. Super dramatic, but dramatic to prove a point. What say you about some of Hollywood kind of getting involved in this tattletale culture, and where do you think it goes from here as somebody who's covered entertainment for years, decades?
I've never been a tattletailer. Have you?
No, I've never
you ever told no, I don't.
I mean, maybe on one of my 5
rumors.
siblings, but sure.
I don't like rumors. I never paid attention to rumors. I really didn't. I stayed out of that. This is uncouth.
Uncouth. Now, I got to tell you, Larry, I grew up with my Italian mother, and we were always told from a very young age, snitches get stitches. Did you ever hear that one?
Damn right. It's uncouth.
All right, I love you, Larry. Larry, my birthday buddy, you're the best. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'd look at Bahrain.
And George, we are in the year of a 2020 presidential election where Donald Trump could be reelected. We also are looking at people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, who's very much for Palestine. Going forward, depending upon who the president is here in the United States, what do you see happening? What do you see going forward for those here in the U.S. and what could potentially be a major fallout or, something possible peace talks, depending upon if it's a Democrat that gets in office?
Well, Faran, if you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said that Donald Trump was on.
Joining me now is civil rights and wrongful death attorney Benjamin Crump. You've seen him on many of these kinds of cases, most notably the murder of George Floyd. Mr. Crump, we are so thankful for having you come on with us tonight. I want to start, counsel, with the verdict. Ahmaud Arbery was killed in February last year, but it wasn't, like I said, until May 5th, 2020, 74 days later, that the shooting video was released. Do you think the verdict would have been different had this video not come out?
Absolutely. I think the narrative that they put out.
Now, you had a moment during the defense's closing arguments where the attorney said that Ahmaud Arbery was there in his khaki shorts and his long, dirty toenails. After this was stated, you heard gasps in the audience there at the trial. What did you make of that? I mean, that was a big moment of this.
It was offensive on every level.
And I have one last question for you. This is a personal question, okay? You have a number of cases on the horizon, including you have Dante, right? You have that case starting next week. Then in 2020, you have, in the first 3 months alone, you have Breonna Taylor's trial, Andre Hill, and the other officers charged in the George Floyd murder. You also have a number of these in the past. Most people see you as the front man for these types of cases. What is it like to have this weight on your shoulders? Do you feel an obligation now to these cases, counsel?
Very much so. The pursuit of happiness.
Well, we will be following these cases, and we are so grateful to have you come on our show tonight, Mr. Crump. Please come back. We're going to be following these cases, and we want to have you on again to talk about those. Attorney Benjamin Crump, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sister.
and Professor Gerald Horn of the University of Houston. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. First, let's talk about the case here first with you, AJ. You know, it was one of these things, you just came off the Kyle Rittenhouse case where there was it was all self-defense there. Then you move to a case like this with self-defense. As far as also the case and how it could impact jurors in the future, what do you see in the cases of self-defense and how the jury is going to look at this going forward?
Hi, Faran. It's nice to be with you again today.
AJ had mentioned this video evidence. You know, we have a number of cases coming up in 2022, literally 4 in a 2-month span. Some of those don't have video evidence. For example, like in Breonna Taylor's case, you only have video evidence of a walkthrough after she was killed. How do you see many of those trials going forward in a sense that what happens when there is no video evidence, especially in cases of black people getting killed?
Well, what happens when there's no video evidence in terms?
What do you think is going on in the rooms right now in Moscow, and what probably is going to be the next step for Russia? I got about a minute, and I'm going to give it all to you.
Well, the truth is,
one of the things taught in history books that most everybody knows is the Vikings were already in North America before Christopher Columbus got here. But what the history books don't tell you, the exact date of when they got here. Well, we now know. And John Huddy is here to tell you.
I'm going to be joined tonight by many of my colleagues, correspondents, special guests, and contributors, including right here next to me, riding shotgun, as we like to say. Faran's joining us now to take us through that. What are we going to be looking for first? Where are the polls closing first?
So as far as 7 o'clock p.m. right now, the biggest states we have are Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Vermont.
No, we're not going to start counting until our polls are closed, for example. Do we have anything on that?
As far as with the states, you know, Florida, like you said, they've been counting since yesterday, even since, you know, as early as 7 a.m. And that's kind of what you learned, what Florida learned when you covered it back in 2000, to start early because
but once
again, it's part of
this administration has been as tough on Russia as any other administration that came before it.
And we keep hearing the Russia, 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 even coming into this election. And one of the big questions is how did we actually get here? Because as we know, the Cold War ended in the 1980s, right? Well, that's where host of In Question, Manila Chan, explains. We want to welcome our viewers from around the world, including those of you watching on the Portable TV app. We're going to first start this hour with some breaking news for you. The White House has rejected a Russian call to extend the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START. President Putin has offered to extend that treaty by 1 year. Lots going on in the world of politics this week, and front and center, what I covered all week for the news with Rick Sanchez, the hearings for President Donald Trump's SCOTUS nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. Now, not only do Democrats argue that this process is being rushed, but also that the addition to Barrett would make the bench a 6-3 Republican majority. Now, all of the Supreme Court justices who actually lean to the right, well, they're all members of what's known as the Federalist Society. Now, there's a proposal by the Ethics Advisory arm of the federal judiciary that actually would block membership of those who belong to the Federalist Society because of perceived bias. But to keep it balanced, as we do, the panel also proposed banning membership of a left-leaning group, the American Constitution Society. Could this help or hurt the way judges are appointed now? So for more on this, I bring in Lionel of Lionel Media and Robert Patillo, both lawyers, very, very familiar with this. So Lionel, first to you. If Judge Barrett is confirmed, you would then have 6 judges, members of the Federalist Society. In your opinion, should there be a ban on judges that are members of groups like this? And Robert, you know, I'm going to ask the same to you because we did see a lot this week in those hearings, you know, questions about how does she feel about gun control? How does she feel about abortion? How does she feel about, you know, all these or climate change? And there was never a stance. But, I mean, do you think this is going to help or hurt at all?
Well, I do, just onto the question.
Now, Lionel, you know, to kind of piggyback off of that, how do you defend knowing that, for example, one of the biggest donors to the Federalist Society is the Koch brothers, giving at least, you know, $17 million? I mean, last year it was a $26 million, they raked in $26 million. How do you defend that?
the whole subject.
All right, so Robert, we're going to switch gears now. Thursday night, Trump and former VP Joe Biden, they weren't on the same stage, but they had simultaneous town halls, replacing the town hall debate that they were supposed to have. But Biden has refused to answer whether or not he's going to expand the size of the Supreme Court. Will he pack the court or not? He is still not given a yes or no answer. Rather, he's saying he's just not a fan, but he's going to have an answer Election Day. Robert, why not just answer the question?
Well, because Republicans have already been packing the courts for.
I'm going to start tonight with just a simple concept that we've all seen and are familiar with. You're born, and in order to prove to the rest of the world that you, in fact, were brought into this world, you have a birth certificate. Same goes for when you leave this world, a death certificate. When you fall in love and you want to show the rest of the world that you and your partner are together forever, a marriage certificate. If it doesn't work out, divorce papers. Now, these simple declarations on paper show two things. First, it's official. You can't fight it. Two, it's a fact. You are alive. You are dead. You are married. You are now single. So when we have declarations on paper, like the United States declaring an end to the war in Iraq, drafted and signed back on December 15th, 2011, is it official? Is it a fact? Short answer here, people, is no. American troops are still on active duty there to this day, 16 years after the U.S. first invaded, 8 years after the so-called war in Iraq ended. After a nearly 19-year-old war in Afghanistan, the United States and the Taliban signed on paper a peace deal. Was that official? Is it a fact? Hours later, the Taliban bombed the U.S.-backed Afghan government, and in return, the U.S. bombed the Taliban. So when Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin meet for 6 hours, walk out, sign on the dotted line that the two countries will establish a ceasefire, President Erdogan says his country reserves the right to use force whenever he wants. And happening less than a day after the signing of the deal in Moscow, the United States blocked the United Nations from backing this ceasefire agreement. So is this ceasefire actually official? Will it be fact? Well, those are the questions that we believe in asking on The News with Rick Sanchez. Now, that very special person I want to talk about is my grandpa, Stanley Fronczak, my father's father. He was born in Chicago back in 1924. He fought in World War II, where he was also a truck driver, delivering weapons and ammo, hauling it all through India and China. After the war, he went home and stayed in the trucking profession, working for Darling Truck Company. He was paid by the hour and made $120 a week, which today would be about $5,500 a month, a little over $66,000 a year. Now, he retired at 55, had a great pension, and lived out his retirement with his grandkids like me until he passed in 1992. Now, if I told him today that right now truckers don't get paid by the hour and they're on the verge of being replaced by self-driving trucks, he would think the world has gone mad. But folks, while you might agree with him, that's what's happening. And it's happening at a speed where if we don't do something now, the effects could be detrimental to our workforce and our economy. Now, you think back to the horse and buggy, where everyone thought that was the transportation forever. Well, the joke was on them when cars replaced them all, and the same is about to happen to our manual, human-driven trucks. There are about 3.5 million truck drivers, and only about 13% of them are unionized. The rest are basically independent contractors. Truckers either take out a giant loan to buy their truck and pay it off, or like what most do, they lease to own their trucks with whatever truck company. Well, that sounds like a great opportunity. What's happening to truckers all over the country is like what happened to Samuel Talavera. Most days he drove more than 16 hours, rarely saw his family, and at night slept in his truck in the company parking lot. And for all that, he took home as little as 67 cents a week. Then when his truck broke down that he leased from the company, he couldn't afford to fix it, so the company fired him, seized the truck, and took the $78,000 he paid towards owning the truck with it. Now, if you're like me, I thought 67 cents a week, but companies, they don't pay truckers by the hour anymore. Pay is based on how much you haul. So when you have a supply chain crisis with hundreds of truckers just sitting at ports, waiting for hours to pick up their next haul, they're not getting paid just to sit there. That's why at least 1,100 truck drivers have filed claims in civil court with the Labor Department for these companies' predatory practices. But Fortune 500 companies have paid lobbyists more than $12 million to fight bills that would hold companies liable and give drivers minimum wage and protections that most U.S. workers have. But just in the nick of time, enter the self-driving electric humanless truck that's estimated to save companies $168 billion with a B dollars in costs. Companies like Tesla, Rivian, rolling out their driverless semis. Walmart, it's already testing their cars in Arkansas, where it's headquartered, and things seem to be running smoothly. Now, many think this is breaking news, but actually, there was one man who was talking about this exact thing and told us back in 2019 when he was running for president.
My plan as president is to install a trucker transition czar and say, look, it is your job to try and manage this transition for the 3.5 million truckers. And Joe, we haven't even talked about the 5 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, diners, retail establishments, all the places where the truckers stop every day just to get out and eat a meal and, like live a life. I mean, if you imagine those communities when the trucks don't stop, there's going to be a drying up of economic vitality on a level that's unprecedented in many of these communities.
As you may know, Andrew Yang didn't win the nomination or the presidency. So now what? Truck driving has always been a great profession for those who don't have a college degree because it used to pay enough to provide for a family like what it did for my grandfather, which gave a great life to his 3 kids, my dad, which then gave my siblings and I a great life, which made me think, where would I be today had my grandfather lost his job to a self-driving truck? Unfortunately, 3.5 million truckers will have to answer that question and what's to become of their families and generations thereafter. Well, tonight, we're asking those questions for them. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight on this. Let's start with you first. Talking about the future of these cars, or these trucks, excuse me, when do you see a complete overhaul of just where all of these trucks are going to be self-driving?
I think it's an incredible time of change in the trucking industry.
And, Louis, as you heard in my opening, a lot of these truck drivers are, for lack of a better phrase, they're getting screwed over by a lot of these trucking companies. How are they able to do this? How are you going to be able to recruit people to be a truck driver when we have such a shortage?
Yes, thank you. And also, I want to thank you for your grandfather. I, too, was a trucker in the Army, so I know what that's like. So you can't blame them, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Ian, I mentioned, Amazon already has been rolling out its self-driving cars, and they're testing it out in Arkansas, where it's headquartered. But, you're also seeing this, like, yes, we're looking at trucking this evening, but, you have, like, for example, McDonald's. You go in and you can order on the computer, and yes, a human hands it over to you, but, you just took out somebody else's job right there, who'd take your order. What should people do looking at this? And you said we've got about 15 years to plan. Yeah. What should people be doing as far as planning?
Of course, you mentioned Amazon. Create opportunities that'll work in our benefit.
Gentlemen, we have Ian Kahn, thank you so much, and Louis Pugh, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your service as well. Gentlemen, thanks. According to a new Gallup poll, Americans are back to being as worried about certain crimes as they were in 2019 before the COVID lockdowns. RT's Molly Barrows breaks down which crimes have Americans worried the most and what they're doing about it. And that's our news, folks. I just wanted to say I am thankful to do a job I love every day. I'm thankful for all of you watching. I'm thankful for all of you that continue to question more with us. From all of us here in front and behind the camera, happy Thanksgiving. And as always, make sure the good news is always yours. Happy Thanksgiving. Have a good night.